So this entire Christmas season, I've had the opportunity, or I've taken the opportunity rather, to preach on what has been the historical shape of Christmas. And so we've not only gotten to hear the normal things that you always hear, with the nativity on Christmas, and then so on and so forth with the baptism of Christ, but I've been preaching on the intervening feasts in between that a lot of people just don't tend to show up for, but how important they are to fully understanding, to getting a full sense of the theology of Christmas. And while that continues even after Epiphany. So last week we celebrated the feast of the baptism of our Lord. And if you go back to the ancient lectionary of the church, which was the one-year lectionary, there were 3 more lections that were so important that the church said that even if Lent comes so early that you can't do all the Sundays, you have to do all of them in a single week, just so these specific Gospels are celebrated within Epiphany. It was that important. A lot of those Gospels have been left out of the new lectionary. And so, since I've had a chance to kind of sort of really sort of sink down into it and understand how vital they are to this understanding of this full season of Christmas theologically, I want to touch on those. And so this week we will be looking at the lection, the gospel where Jesus gets lost as a child in Jerusalem. And then next week we'll be looking at Christ's first miracle, the Gospel of John, which is when Jesus turns water into wine. And these are 2 important theophanies or epiphanies of Christ as God incarnate come to us on earth. And so that being the case, let me read out the entire passage for you from St. Luke chapter 2, beginning at verse 41. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. And when they had fulfilled the days as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. But they, supposing him to have been in the company, went a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinsfolk and acquaintance. And when they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem, seeking him. And it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. And all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. And when they saw him, they were amazed, and his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee sorrowing. And he said unto them, How is it that ye sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my father's business? And they understood not the saying which he spake unto them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and was subject unto them. But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. Amid Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. So I've always appreciated that this lection was part of the church's repertoire, precisely because of what happens. All of us who have been parents know the horror of being in some public place and looking around and figuring out that you've got 3 kids, but you can only see 2 of them. We've all sort of had that experience, right? And your heart sort of just sinks to your toes for a second. You're like, oh my gosh, where's the 3rd kid? And most of the time, he's just standing behind mom or something like that. But sometimes it takes you a couple minutes to find them. Or sometimes you leave the kid at church and start going out to lunch, and you realize, oh gosh, we left the kid at church, and you go back. But not only did Mary and Joseph lose Jesus, they lost him for 3 days. And if that doesn't humanize the Holy Family for you, I don't know what will. It's bad enough to lose your own child, but to lose the Son of God for 3 days is quite a thing to do. But nonetheless, even though most of us can relate to this experience of having lost a child, I think that it has it touches us even deeper on a more spiritual level. Because while it's a common thing to lose track of your kid for a little bit, I think it's also true for each of us that we lose track of Jesus. Each of us loses Jesus for a time. We find that we've walked away, or that we've wandered away, or we get caught up in the hustle and bustle of the crowd, in the chaos of everyday life. and realize that we've left him behind someplace. He's no longer as close to us as he once was. We've entirely forgotten about him and not even had a thought of him, maybe for days on end. We all have had this experience of losing Jesus, and I think that this is precisely what this passage is about, and the lessons that we can take from it. Each of us can learn, number one, that there are times in our lives where we each lose Jesus. We can also learn from this passage that there is a way to seek him, and we also learn from this passage that there is a way to find him. And so let's begin with the losing of Jesus. Let me begin with this passage here. And when they had fulfilled the days and they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. Now, it's pretty common in this day and age, at Jesus' time, when you have big family travels like this, oftentimes you wouldn't go to this sort of a thing just as an individual family in the car. You had a massive caravan. Everyone, all of the Jews from all over were going to Jerusalem for the feast. And so oftentimes what would happen is you would have the men who would travel in one company and the women who would travel in the other company. And the children could travel in either of those companies, with the dads or with the moms, or with the cousins here or the cousins there. And so it kind of helps us to understand better how this might have happened. But nonetheless, I think what we have taking place here is this sort of event in which, on the basis of their assumptions, they lost track of Jesus and where he was. Joseph assumed that he was traveling with Mary in this company. Mary assumed that they were traveling with Joseph in that company. And when they were together, they probably assumed that he was with the cousins. Everyone was just sort of looking out for each other. And they just assumed where he was, and they assumed what he was doing, without ever being fully sure. Until they get a full day into the journey and finally realize, oh my gosh, he's not here. In the same sort of a way, I think that one way in which we can each lose track of Jesus is on the basis of our assumptions. Is on the basis of our familiarity. We tend to think that Jesus is this way or that Jesus is that way. Jesus is like this. Jesus is like that. And lose track of who Jesus really and truly and actually is. I think this relates very well to the life of Israel. You may not realize this, but one of those central stories to the Old Testament is that of Israel when they come out of Egypt and Moses goes up on the mountain for 40 days. And after those 40 days, the people of Israel say, forget this guy. He must have died up on the mountain. And so who have we got? How can we follow Yahweh now if we don't have Moses to show us the way? And so what do? They create a golden calf. Now, a lot of people don't realize this. Most just assumed that what they were doing was that without Moses and Yahweh, they just reverted back into paganism and started creating some sort of an Egyptian god. But on the contrary, what was taking place there is they were not making an image of one of the Egyptian gods or of Baal or of Molech or anything like that. What they were doing is they were attempting to make an image of Yahweh. He simply didn't like the idea of having an invisible God and no one to show them how to follow him. And so naturally they said, let's give him an image. Let's give him a shape. Let's give him a form. Let's fill in all the spaces that we don't like to have empty. Let's put an end to the mystery and give him a face. And so they gave this image to the invisible God. And I fear that oftentimes we as humans like to do that. We don't like the mystery. We don't like not knowing. We don't like the sort of mysterious infinity that God is. And so we like to sort of nail him down and give him a face and give him a form. But the problem with that is what ends up happening is we end up making him after the images that we like, instead of after the truth that he really and truly is. That, my friends, is precisely what an idol really is. And the great danger of the assumptions that we make on the basis of familiarity. And in that sort of a way, Mary and Joseph lost Jesus. And in that sort of a way, we too can lose Jesus as well, by trying to nail down the invisible God, by trying to make finite the infinite, by trying to encapsulate the great mystery that God is. And I think that leads us quite naturally to the next thing. We found how Mary and Joseph, and how we as well, can tend to lose Jesus. But then we find them starting to seek for him. It says this, and they sought him among their kinsfolk and acquaintance. Now this kind of follows naturally along the thought that we just introduced. St. Origen said this about this verse. He said, they found him not among his kinsfolk, for human relations could not comprehend the Son of God. Not among his acquaintance, for he passes far beyond all human knowledge and understanding. If you go back to all the historic theology books, one of the very first things that is taught in theology is God's absolute transcendence. That he is above and beyond anything that we can begin to ever think of or to imagine. As a matter of fact, if you look back at this ascension window back here, just turn around in your pews and look at the ascension window. I could preach many sermons about this ascension window. I'm kind of amazed that this is the first time I've referred to it. but if you look at Jesus, do you see Jesus there in that? If you look above him, you see a little face with 6 wings. Does everyone see that? It kind of looks like a funny little thing. All right, now that everyone, you can turn around now, because you're all going to get a prick in the neck if you keep trying to do that. You've got that image in your mind. That is a seraph. If you look at the scriptures, it always, whenever you see one of the prophets, it gets a vision into the throne room of God. Instead of actually seeing what's on the altar, what they see is the seraphim, the angels that are around the altar, who are explained as having a man's face and 6 wings, 2 to cover their face, 2 to fly, and 2 to cover their feet. You'll find that in Ezekiel, and Isaiah, Revelation. They're all over, anywhere you find someone in the throne room of God. These have become important figures in Christian iconography, in Christian art, just like this. Because it's not appropriate to nail God down into an image, Christian tradition has often said that it's inappropriate to express God the Father in art as an old man, as often we tend to see. And instead, what the art does is it hedges the mystery by placing a seraph. You can't see what's behind the seraph, but the seraph indicates what's beyond it. In the same way, we have to realize that God is not some tame animal that we can put into a cage. But God is this transcendent reality who's above and beyond anything that we can begin to think of or imagine. I like to express it like this. We all know that God's good, right? The scriptures tell us that God is good. But what do we mean when we say that he's good? The way that we understand the word good is a way that's really kind of bound down by our earthly experiences, right? Last night we had pizza. I had some Hawaiian pizza. I thought the Hawaiian pizza was good. Some people don't like pineapple on their pizzas. I'll forgive you for that. I'm fine with it. I thought the pineapple pizza was good. But God is also good. Is God good in the same way that pineapple pizza was good? No. Obviously, that significantly reduces God's goodness, right? Is God good in the same way that my dog is good? No. Obviously, God's goodness is bigger. Is God good in the same way that friendship is good? Well, there's some friendship in our relationship with God, but it doesn't encapsulate the wholeness of who God is. In any way that we try to relate the goodness of God to the goodness of a material thing, it will always fall short. God's goodness necessarily transcends the goodness of the things that we experience in this world. And that's entirely appropriate, right? Because everything within the cosmos is finite. It has a limited degree of goodness. But God, in and of his nature, is infinite and has an infinite degree of goodness. And in the same way that you cannot traverse an infinite path and wear it out, in The same way God's goodness cannot be infinitely traversed and worn out. No matter how far you go down on that path, there's always more to discover. There's always more to realize. There's always more to experience and to appreciate. And by nailing God down into this sort of a simple image that we make for ourselves, we limit the goodness of Him that we can experience. And we limit everything that He can be and do in our lives. That, my friends, is why Mary and Joseph couldn't find Him among His acquaintances and common relations. Because God, while He made all of these things and expresses His goodness through these things, He cannot be completely found in the things of this world. And by limiting ourselves to the things of this world, we end up making idols and losing the fullness that God could express to us of who and what He is. And so we've learned about losing Jesus, we've learned about seeking Jesus in all the wrong places. But now let's learn about finding Jesus. The text says this, when they found Him. Oh, before that it says, and they sought Him among the kinsfolk and acquaintance, and when they found Him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem, seeking Him. And it came to pass after 3 days, they found Him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. And all that heard Him were astonished at His understanding and answers. I was talking with Jamie Slogenhop after the first service today, and he shared with me a little anecdote from his bishop when he was a child. His dad came to the bishop when the bishop was visiting, and his dad said, I could find God on the golf course. And the bishop says, of course you can find on the golf course, but I bet you won't. And I thought that was important. Of course God can be found among other things, but He won't be found in His fullness. To find Jesus as Jesus truly was, they had to seek Him in Jerusalem. They had to seek Him in the temple. My friends, an image cannot be made of God by us because we'll only make Him after our own image. But God can make an image of Himself, and that's precisely what He did in the incarnation. He came to us in our flesh. He came to us in Jesus Christ. And in Jesus Christ, He gives us the fullest revelation of God. Now, there's an important thing about that revelation and the incarnation. It's the recognition that we too are flesh. We're physical things. There is a reason that we have this tendency to want to make a physical image of God, and that's because we're physical. And so God came to us in the flesh, but He also left us with the church. He left us with the church, and with the church's liturgy, and with the church's scriptures, and with the church's teachings. And through those things, they point to God without nailing Him down. The wonderful thing about the liturgy of the church is that it enables us to express through symbol what we could never express with words. And God, who can never be expressed with words, enables us through the liturgy to point to Him and to point in His direction. I remember having a significant experience. When I was in seminary, I spent a good deal of time at an Eastern Orthodox church. It was a wonderful parish, good people, great food. But I remember, because I had just, I just recently come from Protestantism, and so I hadn't been deeply immersed in liturgy as I was there. And one of the things that I remember after going there week after week after week after week was the smell of incense. That smell of incense was so significant. They used it every week, and so the church always smelled that way. And I found that as I walked into that sacred holy space, that was so different than any other space that I had ever been in throughout my life or throughout the week, that smell put my spirit in a place of prayer. By the church giving us this gift of the Holy Liturgy, by allowing ourselves to go through the motions physically, it allows us to take a spiritual journey. We approach this altar with our bodies, but our spirits approach the mountain of God in heaven. We approach the altar here physically on earth, but our souls approach the very cross of Christ. Our bodies receive physical bread and wine, but our spirits eat of the flesh and blood of Christ. You see, unlike the golden calf, which limits God, the sacraments and the liturgies of the church open up onto this broad vista of God's vast eternity. And by means of those symbols, we are able to partake. We are able to find what we've lost and to seek what we find, which is Jesus Christ, the infinite God, come in the flesh, presented to us in the fullness of his revelation. My friends, this is what each of us are called to do. Yes, you could find God in the golf course, but you probably won't. We have all, to some extent, lost Jesus. We've made an idol of him. We all, to some extent, try to seek him in the wrong places and to hedge in the mystery. Let us open that up and find ourselves here in these pews approaching the great infinite mystery that God is, and communing with him by means of the liturgy and the scriptures and the teachings and the symbols and the sacraments of the church. Let us come fully into his presence. And it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.